All right, Jason. So, hot topic here. We're talking about selling preventative services,
Right.
right? Always a challenge, it really, no matter what you're selling. I mean, you could translate this to kind of numerous industries and, the struggle to sell something that's supposed to prevent something from happening that has not happened yet, right? And so, in the article, I talk about sort of evaluating the costs of, like the things like replacement costs and things like that. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, there are these various degrees of products within the security suite. And the feedback loop on them, I feel like, is variably different. So, like, think about antivirus. You could know in a short period of time when antivirus has like prevented something from happening, right? You get
Right.
these warnings, and so like VIPRE's product, like you'll know when it's worked, and it's. But then you have all these other services that, like, they're preventing something much larger from happening, and you don't get that feedback. So tell me a little bit about that in your experience.
Right. For your example, the endpoint security, catches a threat, it puts it in quarantine, and that's something tangible to go into quarantine and see those threats. What was stopped? What could have happened? And you can extrapolate out from there what could have happened had that threat gone through. So I think that's a pretty good example of something that's tangible. Uh, but it's not always that easy, especially in security, when we're usually waiting for a shoe to drop, meaning that security by nature, if it's so reactive, doesn't that then make it even more difficult to sell prevention,
Right.
right? Because we're waiting to react. So how can we, kind of sell prevention when we might not even know what we're preventing yet because we're kind of waiting to react. So, I think that muddies the water even a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like when I was writing the article, like what I was thinking about is, and you could sort of like work backwards and say, like, okay, so a car has like a hard replacement cost. If I crash the car, let's say the car is worth $20,000, uh, that is what will then be replaced. But and so it's very easy to understand that. But when you think about your business, well, guess what? Like, maybe you're paying $150 to insure a car, $200, and you're okay with that. Well, the business pays for the car, right? So,
Right.
like, why not? We should be insuring the business because that's paying for everything else. It's paying for the house. It's paying for this. It's paying for that. All the other things that you are paying to insure, the business is ultimately what is feeding those costs, right? And so, like, if you look at what you pay to just insure everything else, looking at it that way and saying, like, well, yeah, my business, like, I should be paying way more to insure my business in every way possible.
Right. It's definitely a paradigm shift, in the mindset, especially when you talk about in the article, a lot of MSPs haven't experienced the negative outcomes yet. And so I can relate to that because, as a security vendor that partners with MSPs, it's a derivative pitch that the MSPs then give their clients. We're really saying the same thing to each other. The vendor saying to the MSP, here's what could happen to you, to your own business, if you don't protect your house with this componentry. And then they turn around and kind of distill that same pitch to, because they're selling through, obviously, and here's what's going to happen to your business if you don't do these things. So I can relate because there's some hesitancy, and the same hesitancy that exists in the MSP community to take on those services exists in their end customers that they're selling to.
Yeah, and I've touched on this I plenty of times, I think, even throughout the series. But like when something hits close to home, you know, one of the most powerful things about the Ring devices. So, like, I mentioned the security system that I bought. That's
Right.
what I purchased. But they have this app that alerts you when like things happen in your neighborhood. I'll tell you what, like it really drives sales because I went from buying like one doorbell, then I get the app and I see all this other stuff that's going on. Now I got one in the backyard, I got two on the side, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it's just a matter of like they get you in and then they expose you to all of this information, and then it starts to become very more real. And I think about ways that MSPs can do this. Talk about things like sending out like a monthly sort of like threat report and things like that. And like, sure, you can sort of just grab the national headlines and things like that. But if you were to put it into context of like just your customer base and just the things that are going on sort of like in your local area, and put it into that context, like I think it would have more of an impact, just the same way that the ring system does.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, preventative has always been difficult to sell. I think about when I was a kid and I didn't do oil changes in my car enough. You know, I had a late model car, one of the first cars you get, and it only took once. Right, I dropped the transmission, and I had saved for the car, so it was a really bad experience. And even though my parents were telling me make sure you keep it up, get oil changes, it only took once. But how expensive was that lesson? And I think that that's an important key takeaway here is how expensive is the potential lesson to learn compared to, like you said, the preventative kind of the insurance mind frame, the preventative dollars. Maybe that's an illustration that would help.
And really, like, speaking of illustrations, you and I, who are pretty well versed on these topics, are even speaking in analogies. Imagine speaking to a business owner about it who has very little comprehension of security as a whole. And I really think that's what it takes, is like, I think MSPs and the way that they sell these products, they have to develop a language around it to where they act as sort of like translators in a way and have these things at the ready in order to fire them off when they see appropriate.
Yeah, that's a good point. MSPs have to paint a picture, and you don't really paint a picture or hit the emotions with a lot of technical language. A lot of the technical side of the house is used to. So, and that's where the idea of the different skill set, right? Sitting down sometimes, the different skill sets that show through. Somebody that can sit down and talk in layman's terms, and I think paint a picture that you mentioned our analogies, but that's really just a vehicle to simply relate to a subject that we can all relate to. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, let me give you an analogy. Oh, okay, now I get it. Good point.
Yeah, right. And this is why when you pull somebody, you're pulling somebody off the street and you're putting them in an MSP and you're asking them to sell something. It's a challenge, but sometimes it's a strength. So like if you can find somebody that is just really good at being that sort of like liaison, and you can kind of give them a technology concept and then they can go translate it to a customer. Sometimes that's actually really valuable because they don't know the technology either. So they're not speaking, they're not trying to, they're just becoming the filter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what I learned when I got into this industry, and somebody said to me, "Oh yeah, you're riding the dummy curve." I said, "What's the dummy curve?" And they're like, "Well, you don't want to get off it. You don't even want to know what it is, because that could ruin your dummy curve." That's obviously just what you said. It's not knowing too much to hurt, right? It's knowing just enough to be dangerous, but that's it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Being dangerous is key, right?
Right.